External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar arrived in Japan on Sunday for a two-day visit for the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. Dr. Jaishankar held wide-ranging talks with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken, against the backdrop of an unease in India-US ties following Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Russia 3 weeks ago. But Mr. Jaishankar and Blinken are in Tokyo to attend a meeting of the foreign ministers of the four-nation grouping Quad or Quadrilateral Coalition today. And as you know, the Quad is a diplomatic partnership between Australia, India, Japan and the United States, committed to supporting an open, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific that is inclusive and resilient. Now, the talks between the External Affairs Minister and the US Secretary of State also came amid Washington consistently seeking accountability from New Delhi in the case relating to the alleged foiled plot to kill Sikh extremist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu in New York. Now, it's not immediately clear whether Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia and the murder-for-hire plot figured in the Jaishankar-Blinken talks. But Ghazali has been keeping a close eye on all the developments. In fact, he's also tracking the first Quad meeting since the Israel-Hamas war. Right. He will be joining us over the phone line in a few moments, but regional and international issues as far as economic security is expected to be the key focus at this Quad meeting. Dr. Jaishankar has already held wide-ranging talks with Antony Blinken, his American counterpart, against the backdrop of an unease in India-US ties, as one top official in the US just a week ago had commented regarding Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia and the optics of Prime Minister Modi's visit with Vladimir Putin. Dr. Jaishankar and Antony Blinken, now in Tokyo, to attend a meeting of the foreign ministers of the four-nation grouping, the Quadrilateral Coalition, today. Well, in other crucial news, the United States will overhaul its military forces in Japan. As the two countries move to deepen defense cooperation, the leaders of the respective nations have confirmed. This is a sweeping step to modernize their alliance in the face of mounting security threats in Asia. The United States will actually overhaul its military forces in Japan as the two countries have decided to deepen their defense cooperation. The announcement comes as Japan and the US are becoming increasingly cautious about a region where China is seen as increasingly aggressive in asserting its disputed territorial claims, and North Korea continues its illegal weapons program, while both tighten ties with Russia as it wages war in Ukraine. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and their Japanese counterparts Minoru Kihara and Yoko Kamikawa announced the plan in a joint statement following a meeting in Tokyo, where they also called China's political, economic and military coercion the greatest strategic challenge in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. Well, let's turn our attention now to what's happening as far as the US elections are concerned. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are entering the last 100 days of one of the fastest moving and least predictable campaign seasons in memory, after a historic month in the run-up to the 2024 presidential race in the United States. The ground has shifted under both political parties since the 27th of June debate, when Joe Biden's poor performance with Trump threw the Democratic Party into chaos and also prompted Trump's team to eye an expanded electoral map. The race was rattled yet again after the former president survived an assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. Just days later, he actually chose the senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, as his running mate and rallied the Republican Party at its convention in Milwaukee. Then, Joe Biden stepped down from the Democratic ticket. As of now, which way are voters leaning in the US? Well, here's how things stand at the moment.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris's whirlwind entry into the U.S. elections race, uniting the Democratic Party after President Biden's exit, has been a boost to the Democrats. Recent opinion polls show Harris is almost caught up with Trump, but all is not smooth sailing. At 59, Harris is comparatively youthful compared with Biden's ripe age of 81 and Donald Trump, who is 78. Harris has garnered massive support on social media platforms like TikTok since her campaign began. From memes to reels set to pop songs, the Harris campaign is connecting with youth voters, which the Biden campaign failed to do so. In the Times Siena poll, while Harris and Trump are head-to-head among registered voters, Harris holds a substantial lead among voters between the ages of 18 to 29, with 56% of youth voters supporting the Democratic presumptive nominee. Trump leads among the older demographic of voters, with 43% backing the former president. Harris fares better among groups that Biden had been the weakest in, leading with 57% of support from Hispanic voters, while Trump leads among white voters with 56% backing the former president. In the latest CNN SRS survey too, Harris and Trump remain head-to-head among registered voters. Yet, unlike the Times poll, among young voters and Hispanic voters, Trump is just marginally behind, highlighting how close the elections is. The Trump campaign is also seeing radical changes. Unlike his first term, the former president is now embracing cryptocurrency and has laid a roadmap for the same. With just 100 days left in the U.S. polls, the race is heating up. Though the Democrat convention next month is unlikely to throw any surprises, all eyes are on who could be Harris's vice presidential pick. With Disha Bakchi, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Switching tracks, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned the United States that if Washington deployed long-range missiles in Germany, then Russia would station similar missiles in striking distance of the West. The United States said on the 10th of July that it would start deploying long-range missiles, and then Germany from 2026, actually in preparation for a long-term deployment that will include SM-6 Tomahawk cruise missiles and developmental hypersonic weapons as well. Now, in a speech to sailors from Russia, China, Algeria and India to mark Russian Navy Day in the former imperial capital of St. Petersburg, Putin warned the United States that it risked triggering a Cold War-style missile crisis with the move. In fact, to quote Putin, he said, "The flight time to targets on our territory of such missiles, which in the future may be equipped with nuclear warheads, will be about 10 minutes.
Таких ракет, которые в перспективе могут быть оснащены и ядерными боеголовками, составит порядка 10 минут. Уважаемые граждане России, при этом ранее в ходе учения США уже отработали переброску ракетных комплексов «Дарк», «Тайфун» со своей территории в Данию и на Филиппины. Такая ситуация напоминает события времен Холодной войны.
Well, for further clarity on the global ramifications, we have with us former chairperson of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at JNU, Professor Anuradha Janoy. Thank you so much, Professor, for making time for us. Russian and US diplomats say that diplomatic relations are worse even than during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. And both Moscow and Washington have urged de-escalation, while both have also made steps towards escalation. Help our viewers decode what's going on, Professor.
Look, this war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia, but actually Ukraine is backed by all 32 members and especially the US. It's a proxy war. That has been gradually escalating over the past 2 years, especially because Russia is clearly winning. They've got about 24% of the Ukrainian earlier territory is now with Russia, and every day they're making gains. And this is making NATO and the US very tense. They don't want to lose this war. It'll be a big blow on NATO. And so now they're deploying these nuclear missiles, which earlier the US itself had said was a no-no because it can lead to a third world war. And it can. And now Putin has reacted and said that just like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviet Union at that time and the US almost pressed on the nuclear button, but there was good diplomacy, especially from President Kennedy at that time, and it was de-escalated. Putin is warning that unless there's a very clear de-escalation, this can lead to that missile crisis, and it's much worse. Number one, the nuclear weaponry is much more advanced than the 60s, than the earlier Cold War. And second, the distance between Germany, where they want to place these nuclear missiles facing Moscow and St. Petersburg, which would lead to complete annihilation, they said they would retaliate and put nuclear missiles facing Germany, which will lead to mutually assured destruction. Now, the US Defense Secretary Austin did speak to the Russian Defense Secretary Bello, saying we need to manage and de-escalate, but no steps have been taken. This managed de-escalation is extremely important. Negotiations are extremely important also because the earlier treaties which were in place since the 80s and 90s, like the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, START, the Strategic Control Treaties, the disarmament, they have all been dismantled. And the relations between Russia and the US are much worse than they were during the first Cold War. So this new second Cold War, the officials are not taking the name, but Putin has, is much more dangerous. It's dangerous for the world.
Indeed.
And I think all world leaders, especially the important ones, need to tell them to put the brakes and start diplomacy.
Indeed. Putin did repeat an earlier warning that Russia could resume production of intermediate and shorter range nuclear capable missiles as well, and then consider where to deploy them after the United States brought similar missiles to Europe and Asia. There are serious global implications. Thank you so much, as always, Professor Chinoy, for joining us on the World 24/7.